Welcome to AAC After Work 2018, brought to you by our conference sponsor, Prenke Romick, leading the way since 1977 in giving a voice to those who can't speak for themselves. Just to let you know, a course certificate is not offered with this course, so you don't have to worry about taking the quiz, and handouts will be available by tomorrow morning. So I'd like to introduce Kate Ahern with her course Classroom Design for AAC Success. Here we go.
Hi, everyone. So first of all, if you're from Massachusetts and you've seen me present before, you may have seen portions of this slideshow, but I didn't actually I just saw one person from Boston when people were introducing themselves. So hopefully there won't be any overlap for anybody. So I was a classroom special education teacher for 15 years, about, give or take. Teaching children with multiple special needs and complex communication needs. And by doing that, I got very involved in doing augmentative and alternative communication. And as you all know, it's a bit of a niche field. So the more I did it, the more people asked me to do work with it. And now that's all I do. I left classroom teaching, although maybe someday I'll go back. And I do consulting for augmentative and alternative communication. So this morning I was in a school here in Massachusetts doing AAC work. And this afternoon I saw a private client in his home doing AAC work. And now I'm home talking to you about how can we set up our classrooms for AAC success. So my motto for AAC in the classroom, particularly with the kinds of students I tend to see, I tend to work a lot with children who have been unsuccessful at first attempts at AAC for a variety of reasons. They tend to be kids who either have very complex bodies or who have very significant apraxia, which is a message passing problem from the brain to the body, where any intentional movement of the body, be it speech or using their hands, is interrupted because of neurological issues, and they tend to have a lot of anxiety. So the kids I see tend to be even more complex than most of our kids with complex communication needs. So my motto is presume potential. We're going to go in and we're going to want to assume that all of our kids have the potential to be better communicators, and they're all already communicating in their own ways. And they all have potential to do even more wonderful things. To provide access to communication, so often we create this setup where kids have to earn words. And of course, if you have to earn your words, you can't prove that you deserve them. You have to have words to prove you can use words. So we're going to provide access to language for everybody. And we're going to practice patience. Learning language takes a long time. All of us who have taken a foreign language or studied a second language, or even tried to just learn maybe Braille or some other system of re-encoding our language, know that it's really hard to pick up a new language. So we're going to be very patient with our students who aren't just dealing with the difficulties of a new language and learning a new language system, but also the difficulties of having complex bodies or having apraxia and anxiety or other issues that are complicating communication. So the thing I want everyone to remember is that communication success starts and ends with people. I'm going to talk a lot about things, different things we can do in our classroom, ways we can set things up, but the most important thing that leads to success is the people in our classrooms and the people on our teams. And this is true at home too. So for the parents who are watching, the same thing needs to happen at home as it does at school. Our success with communication starts and ends with people. Communication is about connecting with other people. It's not about requesting, it's not about commenting, it's about connection with other people and all of the different parts of communication that allow us to connect. So the people that we want on our team, or the people that we want to, the things we want to build in our people who are on our teams, are people who believe in the potential of each child. And we all have met someone along the line who doesn't believe, who's willing to dismiss a child and dismiss their potential, or who can only see the challenges that the child faces, or who finds it too difficult. Those people make it much harder to have communication success. When we believe in a child, we open up all sorts of new opportunities. We want people who respect each child. Our kids are very quick to figure out who thinks they're a baby, who's treating them with disrespect, who's rude. 2 days in a row now, I've had conversations with elementary school students who use augmented communication, and on both days, the child was telling me about someone who they thought didn't believe in them, or who they thought that they were stupid, or who was rude to them or treated them like a baby. We need people who respect our kids and respect them for all that they offer to the world. We need people who are going to put communication in the forefront. I once had a teacher say to me, a special education teacher who was teaching a class full of kids with complex communication needs, that she could teach everything she needed to teach without AAC, and she was very proud of herself. But it begs the question, is anything worth learning if we can't then talk about it, if we can't share what we know? Communication has to come first. It's all well and good to know, the 50 capitals of all 50 states, but if you can't talk about those states and you can't communicate about your world and the world you're learning about, it's really not worth the effort of learning the other stuff. So communication needs to come first, and then we use that communication to talk about our worlds and to share our knowledge. We want people who seek out information and training. If you want a successful communication classroom, or you want to have successful communication in your school or with the children you're working with, you can't be the kind of person who leaves at 3 o'clock and doesn't think about work again until the morning. And I know that most of us, especially if we're taking a course at 4 in the afternoon or it's 7 at night here, we are definitely the people who go out and seek information and training. So we're not the ones we have to worry about. But I know that there are lots of people who, feel like they just don't have time to do this. And we want to find people who are willing to put in a little bit of extra effort. Not so much extra effort that they burn out, but that they're willing to go the extra mile. We want people who have time to plan and be successful. So that's on administrators to some degree. In order to really have a great augmentative and alternative communication classroom, there has to be time to plan out how you're going to do it. And if there's no time to meet with your paraprofessionals, to meet with the other members of your general education team, if there's no time to sit and work out a plan, you're going to have a much harder time being successful in the long run. So one of the things that we can advocate as teachers and consultants and speech therapists is having time to really do the planning to make this happen. We want people who focus on progress and who are always raising the bar. All too often we set some sort of arbitrary goal that a child must, use a noun and then a verb 80% of the time in all trials. And we've made that goal without sort of any real rationale behind it. And then when the child doesn't meet it, we refuse to allow them to work on new skills. And that's not how communication works. We need to focus on progress. If they're doing more than they were yesterday, more than they were last week, more than they were last month, then we keep raising the bar and we keep giving them communication. And another important thing is we want people who have shared beliefs around communication. So what I'd like to do is use the question and answer section right now. And I want to put out there, what shared beliefs or shared understandings do you think it's important for a team to have when working with children who use augmentative and alternative communication? So we have presuming potential. There's meaning to every utterance a child makes. Presumption of competence. Presume competence. They can learn that devices don't get put away. That's right, Abby. Devices don't get put away. Working knowledge of how the system works so we can model access to the system and device at all time. Belief in the communication bill of rights and presuming potential. The idea that every child can learn and every child communicates, all kids have something to say, that it's worth the extra effort, access to core vocabulary, no prerequisite to AAC, that we accept all forms of communication. All behavior has meaning, here, here. The importance of modeling, the desire to connect with a child in a genuine fashion. That one is huge. I always tell parents, I tell everybody, AAC work with kids on AAC is relational. It's about the relationship as much as it is our skills and our belief and what we're able to do. If we can't have a relationship with the child we're working with and connect with that child in a really genuine way, then we're not going to make the kind of progress we want to see. The idea that none of us are mind readers, kids have something to say that we don't know. Presumed ability in communication. Communication isn't testing, so no find the, touch the, that's not communication, that's answering questions or taking a quiz. All progress is good progress. You guys can keep adding answers to that. I'm gonna show you this slide here. This is some shared understandings that some people put together in a team of what they thought everybody had to have to be successful. So the idea of see me, see my AAC, which is back to that everybody's AAC is within reach. And feel free to post pictures of kids using AAC with that hashtag, see me, see my AAC. Everybody needs to be on board. The idea that everybody communicates, we have open expectations. We don't put artificial limits. All behaviors, communication, everyone has potential, that it begins with intent. All students need to be included, that we need to allow wait time and response time, that our goal is autonomy. Our goal is not for children to say what we tell them to say, but that our goal is for children to make messages that come from within themselves. That communication is interactive, that it's about hearing something we don't already know, that communication is messy, that we expect progress from our kids, that we're going to raise the bar, and that communication is not an activity. It's an all day, everyday event. I really urge all of you who work in classroom teams or even families to sit down and do this together. Come up with a list of shared understandings about communication and then hang them up. Go back to that list, go back to your beliefs. So when it comes to a situation that's challenging in your classroom and you need to make a decision about, you know, are we gonna continue to have this child, you know, find the this or find the that on their device, you can look back to your shared understandings and say, you know what, pointing to what they're told to point to is not a shared understanding. Autonomy is a shared understanding, and open expectations and potential. So maybe we're going to move past that. But shared understandings is a huge part of how we become a team and how we make sure that our kids are going to be making progress. So now that I've sort of talked about that people piece, which is the most important piece, I'm going to talk a little bit more about things and processes. But all of this always comes back to people. So as I'm talking about this, really think in your head about how does this play out with the people who are part of our process? And how do we make sure that everybody is going to be part of the success of AAC in our classrooms? So this is a little bit more of a boring sort of, not boring, but I think less important than the relational piece. But physical things to have on hand, stuff to remember. We always need non-electronic backups of our electronic systems or a combat Ike. Wow, combat Ike was not the word I wanted. That's a change I made this afternoon and apparently really had a typo. We want a backup system that is paper-based or otherwise low-tech for our high-tech systems, because the one truth of high-tech is at some point it's not going to work. We always want to have a power bank or a portable power source just in case. We want to keep some spare chargers at school just in case. We want to have tools to adjust our mounting systems, Allen wrenches, some non-slip Dyson grip pads for stuck levers. You can't use your device if you can't get it up in front of you. We want to have various pointers. I have the word occluders there. Occluders is when you take a piece of cardboard or a piece of poster board and you cut a hole the size of a button or a few buttons and you hold it over the child's device so they can only see the button you'd like them to be thinking about. just always remember that since our goal is not to have kids say what we tell them to, just because we use a pointer or an occluder or some other way to indicate what a child might want to say doesn't mean that they have to say that thing. Sometimes they have something totally different in mind. So these are some things that you can set up in your classroom. I've seen wonderful things happen in inclusion classrooms when you have some pointers and you let peers be the ones who are doing some modeling. They love a chance to be the person using the pointer. In some younger classrooms, I also have modeling puppets who, the children love to wear the puppets and model for their friends. Another thing that I really think every classroom should have for a few reasons is a natural aided language communication board hanging on the wall or somehow available to everyone. So this can be simply taking the main page of a communication system, or if you're using like the 40 words from Project Core or one of those boards, you can have something like that. But hanging up a giant poster, or Cafe Press is a website that will make 30 by 70 inch wall decals that you can hang in your classroom that are static and technically can be moved around, but I don't recommend it. They're hard to move. And also you can project onto your smart board, or if you're using a paper-based system like a pod book, you can use something like a Pico projector where you can aim the camera at the book so it's up on the screen so everybody can see you model. Some classrooms now have things like Apple TV or Chromecast where you can show the modeling happening in the classroom. All of these are great ways to bring modeling to the whole room. They're also great ways to set the priority in your classroom. If a huge section of your classroom is set up for modeling, then the minute somebody walks in, they're going to know that that's a priority. And they're going to know that the thing that you're focused on is teaching language in this way to have more kids communicating. So I really urge people to do this and get some sort of large board for modeling, and then of course smaller boards for smaller situations of modeling. So then we have the question of how are we going to do this? So I'm old enough that I remember, and for some of us this was last week, but when we Velcroed everything. So we Velcroed our symbols, we made core words with Velcro. And I think what we found with the Velcro was, in some ways that was great. You can pull off a symbol and bring it to the child to show it to them. Lots of different ways you can use them. But the other problem, the opposite side, is you're going to go home with Velcroed symbols to your sweaters, and symbols are going to be missing. And how do you put things back in the right place? Or you can do a core language display. And you have to decide for your classroom which one is going to be best for you. So are you going to do a Velcro display where you can pull things off because your kids have some vision issues and you want to be able to show them the symbol closer? Or are you going to do a core language display so that you can stick to the same motor plan as you model? So really think about your kids and your learners and what's going to work for you. Another thing to think about is the color coding of our systems. So there's some research that says to our new AAC users, the colors in our systems don't mean a lot. But who they do mean a lot to are us, the people who are modeling, and people who have learned grammar. But truthfully, you can use the color coding that's in almost every system to help you support your learners. And this should be something that we train our paraprofessionals to do. We can train them to, when they're trying to find a word when they're modeling, to think about the part of speech and where the word would be. So I'll work with kids sometimes and they'll give me a sentence that says something like, I store. And okay, I store. I think you need a green word if you're using Fitzgerald Key. I think you need a green word of verb. You what store? You go store, you think about the store, you saw a store, and then you can help them use the color coding to find the word that they mean. You can do lots of fun activities with this. You can do some Mad Libs kind of activities where you have kids find words, you know, by color. So I need a noun. Who can find me an orange word from their device? You can use colors as you talk through your aided aided language stimulation. So as you're modeling, you might think to yourself, okay, I'm gonna show you this. I'm telling you something. Actually, that would be pod, which the color coding is a bit different for. So let's say you're using something like Proloco to Go or Touch Chat, where you might say, I went to the store with, it was a person. I need a person word. Well, let me look at the yellow words. Those are my people and pronouns. I went to the store with, oh, here are my yellow words. I went to the store with mom. So that you're able to support thinking about how to find words in addition to learning language. You can do silly sentence games. I used to save all of the spare symbols that I had from News to You and Unique Learning System. And the kids used to do lots of great sorting activities with them. And then we'd use them for other projects. So we'd color in the leftover symbols, and the kids would sort them by part of speech, or everybody would pick a yellow word and a green word, and an object, so an orange word, and make a sentence, and we do some silly sentence activities. So really using colors to support kids as they're learning language is a great way to lead to AAC success in your classroom. We also want to be thinking about visual supports for adults. Modeling AAC can be hard, especially at first. I trained a new OT and a new CODA today, very briefly, on how to use a child's pod system, and they were overwhelmed, and I understand that. I was overwhelmed the first time somebody brought a pod book into my classroom. So we want to be thinking about how can we support the adults in the classroom. So we can have posters for inspiration or for reminders. I used to ask the last teaching job I had, we had a weekly meeting with the paraprofessionals and myself and some of the other team members. And we would set a goal as a team for the week, and we would hang it up on the wall. And sometimes that goal would be like, this time we're going to remember all week, we're going to remember to send home everybody's equipment, all the crazy equipment they have. And sometimes it would be more of a communication specific goal or an academic goal. I remember one time we said, this week we're all going to make sure we wait 15 seconds after we say something to a child for them to respond. And when you have a goal like that hanging on the wall with visual support, it's really easy to remind each other that you're working on it. We can use the things on the walls to set priorities. I think a lot of times we need to give permission to ourselves as teachers and as therapists and to paraprofessionals that, it's okay when things aren't perfect. The art project doesn't have to be perfect. It's, it should look like it was the child's art project. We need almost permission slips hanging on the wall that say, it's all right if it takes an extra 10 minutes to do something because you're modeling. So really setting the priorities and reminding people what's important, what is the most important thing that our kids are going to leave with at the end of our time with us, and hopefully that's going to be some communication. And in order for that to happen, we have to set priorities, and we can use visual supports for adults to help us do that. Another way that we can support communication learning in the classroom is that we can use descriptive teaching labels. So the descriptive teaching method, which I'm not going to talk too much about tonight, is a method of teaching content area for children who use AAC. So it was invented by Gail Van Patenhoven, and the idea is that normally when we teach in a very referential way. So if we're teaching about a volcano, we teach the child all these new vocabulary words: volcano, magma, lava, and then we expect the child to use those words when we ask them questions. So what do you call the stuff that comes out of a volcano? Lava. But what we find with our kids who use AAC is that when we try to teach in a referential way, first of all, we spend all sorts of time programming words that the child is never ever going to use again. And second of all, it puts us in a position where we aren't teaching the core words we should be teaching. We really need to be focusing on kids learning to use the language that they already have in front of them. So when we use descriptive teaching, instead of programming in volcano and lava and all of those things, we teach in a way where we use the language the kids already have. So we might say, you know, inside a volcano, there is lava. Lava is very, very hot. It is dangerous. It's difficult to be around. You have to run away. It can be scary. And as you do that, you model those words. That way, as you go over this material again and again, as you teach your content, you're focusing on core words like hot, danger, go away from it, words like that, that kids can use again and again and again. So they're both learning their content and they're improving their understanding of language, their language system, and their ability to communicate. So descriptive classroom labels sort of take that idea of how we can better teach content area curriculum to AAC users and add to it a level of supporting with visual supports. So we're going to label the room not just with picture, symbols, and text. So any preschool, first grade room you go into, you're going to see that the chair says chair and the wall says wall and the door says door. And we want to do that because we want to support literacy. But we also want to put related core words near all of these things. So on the door, we don't just want to have the word door. We want to also have words like go out, come in, open it, close it, where are you going? But the clock, we want to have, you know, it's a clock, what time, how long, and items like that. I just want to point out, I'm really sorry to everybody watching, that despite the fact that my iPad is plugged in, my battery is draining. So just putting it out there, if something goes haywire, that's what happened. I'm really praying it won't though. Everybody pray to the technology gods for me. So we're going to have these labels around the room that have core words. So that way, when you come to the door, you can point to the symbol, you know, we're going to go out. Can you turn the knob? And then the child can also find their words on their device, or you can model it on their device. You can play games like the way they do in kindergarten when they play Read the Room, where you can say, all right, everybody, let's find some of the words that we're learning about in the room. Let's find all the places in our room where the word open happens. And it might be by the window and by the door and by the box of pencils. You can have scavenger hunts to find words. Lots of great activities you can do with these descriptive labels. We can think about color coding these as well, so kids learn parts of speech. And I have a great, I have a student I work with who we have this great story that when I started working with her, for the clock we had how long as a phrase with the clock. And eventually I would arrive for our session and she would say, how long? And I would tell her how long, and she would stare at the clock. And you know, if I told her we're going to end at 4, at 5 of 4, she'd start staring at the clock and laughing because she knew at 4 o'clock she could get up and leave. But having that support, that how long question that connected with the clock, allowed her to learn that sentence so that she could ask me how much longer we would be. Another thing we can think about doing is doing a word of the week. Now, there are all sorts of ways of doing this. You can find all sorts of calendars online that have 1 or 2 or 5 words for a week or a word a day. Tons of different core word calendars out there. You can use a structured system. If you're in preschool, you can think about the Tell Me AAC curriculum from Attainment. Lots of different ways to do this. But the general idea is you're going to have 1 to 5 or maybe more core words a week or a month that you're going to focus on. You're going to make it as fun as possible. So you're going to go like Pee-wee's Playhouse style. Every time you hear the word, you're going to scream and jump up and down. You can give a point to whoever claps first. Really bring attention to that word, make it fun. I have some staff who get so into this that the kids actually start rolling their eyes. You're going to pair the words that you're working on with the symbols and location in each child's individual system. You can practice spelling the word. This is a great way to get literacy in with your work. You can do some word study and look at the letters and the sounds in the word and what kind of word it is. It's very convenient that the Dolch word list and the Fry word list are almost the same as our core word list. So lots of ways we can pair literacy in there. We can have kids make personal glossaries. So you can see in the slide that's up there, you have a child who spelled out good using pieces of paper that had the letters. He put the picture symbol for good that was from his system. And then he has a definition there. It's a symbolated definition. It's an older picture. We now know that symbolating things is not the best way to support literacy. But he has a sample sentence there, and he had a definition as well. I don't think you can see it on that slide. But over the course of a year, they collected all the words that they did these papers for. And so at the end of the year, they went home with a personal glossary that had, 50-something words that they had learned to do. You can also use these words to make a word wall. It'll be different than your word wall for literacy, but a communication word wall. You can do lots of video modeling. So you can make a video a week of the word being used. This is especially good for things like verbs, where it's really hard to show in a picture what go means. But if you take a video of kids on the playground that says go, then, when you see a child go down the slide or go up the hill, it'll be much easier to understand the words. And then you can keep those videos as a way to review content. Just keep in mind, if you only do 1 to 5 words a week, it's going to take somewhere between 5.5 to 27 years to teach the first 1,000 words. So you can't do this instead of modeling. This has to be in addition to intensive aided language stimulation. So let's talk a little bit about peers. And if you're a parent, let's think a little bit about siblings. So what are some of the things we can do to have our typical peers really involved with augmentative and alternative communication in the classroom? So the first thing that we can do is we can teach peers about augmentative communication at their level. So how you teach a preschool or kindergarten class about AAC is going to be different than how you teach high schoolers about it. You can engage empathy about how difficult it is to learn a language nobody else is using. You can have some extra communication systems or low-tech versions, or a classroom display like the posters we saw that allow peers to do some modeling and to use the display. I promise you, in any of the elementary school grades, they're all going to go in and find all the potty words first. That's what's totally going to happen, and that's just expected. You can have peers help pick the cool words and phrases to go on a device. Trust me, no kid wants us picking the words that are cool to use. We're still thinking that we're saying epic, or I drive my niece nuts because I keep saying things like, I'm keeping it 100, which they don't say anymore. That lasted like a week. But having the peers decide on the cool language can really be helpful. I actually had, at one point, I had some boys who wanted to flirt with girls with their AAC systems. And I had a male peer tutor who would come into my class, and I had him work with my 2 students to find clean pickup lines to put into their speech devices. So they had things like, excuse me, are you lost? The Miss America contest is that way. Sorts of pickup lines in their devices, all picked out by the children and the peers together, which was just a really fun project for them and made their devices so much more fun for them. We want to be sure that our AAC users have vocabulary about their special interests and about popular culture. You can't bond over, Minecraft or whatever the newest fad is, doing the dab or baby shark or whatever the hip thing that's happening is. You can't bond over those things if you don't have words to talk about them. So making sure that peers help you figure out what needs to be on those pages.
Hello, everyone. I actually just spoke with Kate, and yes, her iPad died. She is going to call back in, though, with her phone, and she's going to continue to move on. So here she is. Okay, you're back.
I'm back, but I'm without slides. So why don't we take some questions right now? And once I can see my slides again, I will go back to finishing up the presentation.
If you have kids using different devices, what do you use for large communication board displays? That's a good question.
That is a good question.
Languages.
So it sort of depends on which devices I have a happening in the classroom. But in general, I'll do 2 core word displays in the 2 different symbol sets. Because in my situation, I've typically had one kid with symbol sticks and another kid using PCS or using Unity. And then I will model on their device as much as I can and have my paraprofessionals do that. But when I'm teaching a descriptive language, when I'm teaching a lesson using the descriptive teaching method, I'll use just a core word board, and I'll ask the paraprofessionals to model what I model. So I'll have a core word board up, and I'll point, I'll say the volcano is hot. You want to go away from it. And as I point to those on the core word board, I'll be asking the paraprofessionals to go ahead and point to those things on the child's device. So any recommendations or tips on how teachers can incorporate AAC into community-based classes? So Ahern, I love that question because that's the group that I taught. I taught high school transition age as well, and I loved using AAC on the community. So we would all bring our devices out in the community. My paraprofessionals all knew that the expectation was we would be packing up those devices and we would be putting them on the bus, and when we get off the bus, we'd be setting up the mounts and setting up those devices. We used to do all sorts of great activities. So a lot of my kids had IEP goals to interact with a community worker. So that could be anything from ordering something to asking where something was. It could be, we would have scavenger hunts in various places. So we might go to the mall and have a scavenger hunt and, for example, go up to the movie counter and ask what movies are playing. Those sorts of things. So we did lots of AAC work like that, and then we did lots of modeling in the community. So we would all gather in front of, the coffee shop, and I would talk to the kids about we're going to go into the coffee shop. While we're in there, I expect we're going to be relatively quiet. We're going to go and we're going to ask for what we want, and I'd be modeling this language on one kid's device or another as I did it, and ask my paraprofessionals to do the same. And then we would go in and place our orders or something. Even now that I'm not teaching, I run AAC groups in our local community. And this summer we did community events the whole summer long where all of the kids in the group would come and we just go out in the community. And it was very unstructured, but we did tons of modeling. And then the kids talked to each other a lot, which was really fun. And then depending on where they were able to interact with people in the community. I think you can choose ahead of time some core words that you're working on while you're in the community to really model or look at the different functions of language. So, we really want to do at least one request and one comment or that sort of thing as we model. Tips to help the general education early elementary teacher encourage peer modeling. AAC user child has a separate device for modeling. So we all live in the real world, which means that there may not be a separate device for modeling. In a dream world, we would have we'd have several separate devices that are for modeling. I think in general ed, what really helps for peer modeling is picking a few kids that the gen ed teacher designates as kids that we're going to train to be peer models. And then we're going to teach those kids about the AAC system and allow them for, a month or a quarter or however you want to do it, be the peer modelers. But then they have the job to train the next bunch of peer modelers until eventually you've trained everyone. Typically the kids fight over who gets to be the peer model for the day. But there are lots of ways that you can do that. Another way is, in elementary ed, you're doing a lot of language learning that is very similar for AAC users as it is for kids who are in gen ed. So if you're working on learning action words, you have a lot of great structure within an AAC system to talk about verbs. So using the child's system to support the general education lesson is a great way to do some inclusion. Is there a good video somewhere to see someone modeling and teaching a class with a large communication board and they are using their devices to respond? There is a lesson that's being taught using the descriptive teaching method that you can find that Gail has done that I think you can find on YouTube, but I will check and try to add it to the handouts beforehand. All right, Kate, how do you get the entire professional staff on board? Bribery. I'm just kidding. Bribery is when you give somebody something to do something negative. It's a reward if you give somebody something to do something positive. So I would typically have contests. You know, everybody gets a point every time they model a word or phrase that is one level above what that child normally does. The most points at the end of the week gets a coffee gift card, or you know, anything like that. I did lots of contests. I also did things where the whole class would do it. So everybody counts the number of times that they model. And if the whole class is able to hit 100 models every day for 5 days, then I would bring in bagels and coffee, or I would do all the cleanup at the end of the day so the staff could leave when the kids left, if my boss would allow that. And one of my recommendations for students with both motor and cognitive delays for language system remodeling, as well as a response time. I'm not going to go too much into that. That's pretty individual, depends on the kid. I think you have to learn how to feel a kid out for what their response time is. And sometimes that means doing lots of language samples and watching, you know, how long you typically have to wait for them to respond, and sort of keeping that in mind. But I'm not going to go too much into language systems right now because it's not really what the presentation is about. I'm also an agnostic about language systems, so I really don't think there's any one right answer to that question. So my slideshow is back up. We've been talking about peers, and we have been talking about ways to develop empathy, and about having an extra communication system in the classroom. Remember, the extra communication system can be a paper system. So there are lots of directions online for how to print out a dynamic system and then turn it into a book. So you can have paper systems for peers to model on, so that if you don't have enough devices. Another thing that you can do to make sure that, that peers are fully included in and understand about AAC is to make sure that your classroom and school library have books that include characters that have AAC. So there's, depending on the level of the child, there are lots of different books out there that have characters that use augmentative and alternative communication. So for example, for younger kids, there's the Romeo Riley series. And that series is a young boy who has complex communication needs, and he gets confused quite a bit. And it can be pretty amusing the way that poor Romeo gets confused. And he tries to be a detective and figure out these things he doesn't understand. And there's books like How Katie Got a New Voice and a Cool New Nickname. And then for older kids, you've got books like Out of My Mind. And then as you get into even older kids, you have books like Ghost Boy. But making sure that those books are available in your school library or in your classroom library, so kids can read about other kids who use AAC. So often AAC users think they're the only one in the world, and peers also start to think that, you know, there aren't any other kids like my friend in my class, when, you know, that isn't true. The other thing to really think about is, if you have parent permission, to really think about sharing phone numbers and addresses and things, so that birthday invitations and phone calls happen. You know, it's one of those things there, our kids are always texting each other, and even at a young age, they're texting and using social media. But if our kids who are using AAC don't have that way of connecting through communication over the internet, then how are they going to connect? So really thinking about, how do we make sure that our AAC users have a way to be part of that that social world. If you have parents' permission, you can also make sure to share things like phone numbers to make sure that friendships can blossom outside of school as well as in school. I work with a little girl named Lucy. I'm not sure, her mom might be watching right now, I'm not sure. But she has her general ed friends that they call Lou's Crew. And these are friends who have come up with her for years, and they're close friends to her at this point. And she really values those friendships, and they really value her. So it's important that they understand how she communicates. And then also thinking about using the cameras, the video camera and the still camera, to take pictures and to teach AAC users how to take pictures of their life. Instagram, Snapchat, all of those things are huge, and those are all ways of connecting through photographs. And because AAC systems have ways to take photographs, you know, really encouraging peers and the AAC user to use photographs is a great way to make sure that everybody participates in that same sort of environment. So I want to be thinking about using my phone. I'm not sure how well you all can see the various slides. So you want a copy of the social story? Sometimes I have to wait. Okay, it's for a specific child, but I'd be happy to share it. I also have one about sometimes there aren't handouts that I mentioned that maybe we could read before this session, but we decided not to. Yes, there will be handouts, don't worry. Somebody always asks. So one of the things that I think about is having communication classroom rules. And here are some of the ones that I like when I'm out looking at schools. So the rules would be everyone has a core word system with at least 8 to 10 words, even if they can't access it yet. So often we take our kids who we don't know how they're going to access it or if they understand it, and we deny them language. Everybody gets a system. We have a rule that if you're modeling, then you're talking, and if you're talking, then you're modeling, and vice versa. There's no talking unless you're also modeling, no exceptions. And again, you can, come off sounding like a jerk by saying it that way, or you can say, whoever does the most modeling is going to win a prize and really build up to it. Or say if we all model so many times during the day, we'll have a prize together. That's a good way to get parents involved too, is ask them if they want to donate prizes. Having a rule that if the teacher is teaching and the para is sitting, so often I would find myself teaching a lesson and the paraprofessional would just be sitting listening to me teach. If I was teaching, then the para had to be modeling. We have a rule, this is Kelly Fauner's rule, but I love it. No naked switches, which means there has to be a picture on a switch. The picture or the post-it or whatever you're going to use has to say what's going to happen when that switch is activated. We're not going to take the switch and go in the hall and record something and come back and have a child activating a message and they have no idea what it is. So no naked switches. We always have a way for the child to look at the switch and know what's going to happen. Every single activity has a communication objective. Every single activity. Recess, the bathroom, lunch, PT, there's a communication objective for each of these. And that might mean going through your schedule and writing down what that objective is. During PT, this child is going to request a break. Or during PT, the PT is going to model stop and go as they do activities with the child. So communication objective for every single activity. Any downtime is modeling time. I used to talk a lot about avoiding the void when I taught a substantially separate classroom, because there'd be this void where it was so easy for the paras or the teachers to start having a conversation, the kids would just sit. So any downtime is modeling time. And that could just be that you talk about, so today I was working with a student and the student was not very excited to be engaging with me. So I just told him a story about how on my way to work this morning, I was caught in a rainstorm. When I get out of the car, my feet were in a puddle and my feet were all wet, and now my feet were, and when I said, now my feet are, he actually activated cold, and he was right, they were cold. They're still cold. But it allowed me to take this downtime where we had this 5 or 6 minutes where we were just sort of sitting around and have a conversation where I was just modeling, and I expect him to participate. I was just telling him about my day, because someday I'd like him to be able to tell me about his day. We're going to have teachers and therapists lead by example. So teachers and therapists have to be modeling too. They have to be making sure the devices are out, that they're giving wait time. They have to be showing what's important. And then somebody just asked about this, have a collection of 5-minute communication activities ready. So actually, if you go to the Proloco to Go Assistive Wear Core Word Classroom and you sign up for that, they have a bunch of 5-minute fillers there that came from this idea of having 5-minute activities ready. So you can find a bunch of them in the assistive wear. So I'm going to show you this last slide, which has a video that you're not going to be able to see, unfortunately. And then I will take last questions and we'll wrap it up. So this last slide shows a predictable chart writing activity. So this was, you can see in the picture a little girl, and she has a device in front of her, and the person next to her is banging their hands on the table. And then there's, you can't see it, but there's a poster-sized core word display also on the table. And we have been talking about books, and the kids did some writing. We filled in, we sang a song where we said, books, books, I love books. I love to read good books, books about, and each kid filled in what kind of book they like to read. Books about bedtime, and books about bags, and books about Mo the Frog. You can tell who's doing their early learning skill builders curriculum at their school. Books about moms and books about dads. I love to read good books. So this is a literacy activity, but of course the kids were filling in using their devices, and then we were talking about words. And then if you could see the video, which you can't, you would see us singing the chant and then pausing, and each kid filled in their thing they loved to read about. So we ended up with both a great video of them and then a great writing sample that they were able to take home, and we were able to use in our alternative assessment portfolios. So finally, I want to invite you to think about every single activity you have as an opportunity for AAC, and to be thinking about communication and what your priority is. So how can you redo morning meeting or morning circle? And my suggestion is get rid of it. You shouldn't be doing calendar after 2nd grade. If you need to work on dates and times, there are other ways to do it. But if you're going to do morning meeting or circle, how can you make sure kids are using their devices for authentic messages? How are you going to have more communication in art and gym and PT and vision? What about, you know, when you're freshening up and doing toileting and snacks and meals? How are you going to have more communication during transition time and downtime? So I want to invite you all for sort of a little homework to pick an activity where right now not much communication is happening, and think about what the barriers are and how you can overcome them. All right, and with that, we have about 2 minutes for a couple of final questions.
There's a bunch of really good ones, so let me start here. With the large amount of material covered in just one day or unit within a general ed high school classroom, do you have any tips on how to narrow down what's incorporated into the descriptive teaching method?
So that's going to depend on your learner. So this is something I'm doing a lot of right now, inclusion with AAC users in general ed, middle school and high school. And these are kids who are working at some pretty early language levels. So what we do is we sit down as a team and we look at the activity everybody else is doing, and then we pick a target. So for example, they're going to be using, one group I work with, they're going to be doing onomatopoeia. So bash, crang, boom, you know, those sorts of things. So for my child who uses AAC, we're going to be thinking about, she'll also do onomatopoeia because it's just fun, but she's going to be more thinking about what kind of actions happen that make those things happen. So if something bangs, there's usually an action that causes the bang, right? Something exploded, or you drop something. So she's going to be working on targeting verbs that go with the onomatopoeia, because right now for her, she isn't using enough action words in her sentences. But so you want to target what the kid is working on. For another child I have who's at a much earlier language level, His science class was learning about weather, but at a higher level. It was 8th grade. So he was simply working on hot and cold. So he was really focusing on those two core vocabulary words as the kids did other activities. And we either had materials that he was working on in the class but separately, so stories about hot and cold that we put into Pictello books, or he was doing the same activities and he was activating hot or cold every time the teacher talked about hot and cold. So we had a few different ways we were helping him do that. But it really depends on the child, and then you really have to break it down to what is that child's goal in that activity.
How do you get buy-in from paraprofessionals to support AAC in the classroom?
So I think it really depends, again, on the paraprofessional. So some of them really want to make a difference in the lives. I mean, let's face it, they're not paid very much. So some of them are there to make a difference. Some of them are there just to put in their hours and go home. Either way, we sort of need to inspire them. I think when they see success, they usually give more buy-in. When all else fails, I use data collection to support, most paraprofessionals, except they're going to be taking some data. If I have them take data on, is the child looking when you model, and you have to model 27 times a day and check off whether or not the child looks. Well, I don't really care if the child was looking most of the time. What I care about is the modeling happened. So I can do it that way, but I'd much rather do it through inspiring them. But, some people are harder to inspire than other people. But I did a lot of, let's work for a prize, or let's do an activity and we'll get takeout on Friday if everybody models so many times this week. I found that to be a much better way to do it than through sort of coming down hard.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I'm sure that everyone is thinking the same thing. You are such a trooper. You're so patient and creative. And so thank you for joining us, Kate.
No, I apologize for the brief parafailure, but I'm glad it was only 5 minutes and not 20.
You were just amazing. So I just want to remind everyone, if you missed the beginning of it, you do not have to worry about the quiz. There is not a course certificate associated with this, and Kate is going to be sending us the handouts. So we will upload them and have them available as soon as we have them. And then for more free information about the world of AAC, I also want to let you know about the podcast Talking with Tech, hosted by AAC experts Rachel Madel, Chris Bouguet, and Lucas Stuber. It's dedicated to sharing information and ideas about AAC, and you can check it out at Exceptional Ed or iTunes, Stitchers, wherever you get your podcasts. So thank you so much for joining us.
With me.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Bye.